Now, when you're building WordPress websites, you'll very quickly come to realize that you have to start working with dynamic data to get anything beyond the basics. Now, if you're thinking, what exactly is dynamic data and why should you care? Let me just quickly give you an example of a page that we are going to create and just reference that dynamic data. So this is the page we're going to create. You can see we've got this filter across the top. We've got our featured image for our posts, our title, the author, the date it was posted, an excerpt, and so on. This is all dynamic data. And all dynamic data basically means is that information is being pulled from your database, that's the core of WordPress, and being output in a certain way. So we're going to be able to pull that data in and build things up using that data. That's basically all it is. But it opens up so many possibilities. So using this example, we're going to recreate this, and I'm going to take you through the whole process of how, where, and when you can start to use dynamic data inside WordPress using Bricks Builder. Now, we need to do a few things before we can work with dynamic data in Bricks effectively. So first of all, come into your dashboard, into Bricks and into Settings. From there, choose the Builder tab, scroll right the way down, and you'll see you've got this section called Dynamic Data. Ensure you've got Render Dynamic Data text on canvas enabled, and the same with the Show Dynamic Data key in dropdown. Then hit Save Changes, and we've set things up to start off with. So now we're going to go into our templates in this example. And we're going to create a kind of catch-all archive template to display our posts in the way that we want to. Now, you're not restricted or limited to only working with dynamic data with archives or templates inside Bricks. You can use it basically anywhere inside Bricks, full stop. Anywhere you can access that Bricks editor, you can use dynamic data in a multitude of different places and ways. But I want to keep this simple to demonstrate how to get started. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new template. We'll call this catch-all archive. We'll choose the template type and set that to be archive in the top right, and then we'll click Publish. We'll choose to edit this with Bricks. And we've got a couple more things we need to do. Let's come over to the Settings section, open up the Template Settings, and under Conditions, we're going to add a condition to say where and when we want to use this. We're going to choose this to be Archive, and we're going to set this to be All Archives. We're also going to click the Populate Content and choose what content we want to display. If we don't do this, we may not get the content we want. We may not get any content at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the content type. We'll set this to be Archive Posts. Choose the post type to be Posts and click Apply Preview. Now this becomes more useful when you're actually creating custom post types and things like that. But I don't want to go into that. If you want to see how to do that alongside Bricks Builder, check out this video. It'll take you through the entire process and get you up to speed in about 30 minutes or so. We've now got our blank editor ready to start building. So let's add in a section. There's our section with our container. And what we can do, we can start to build things out. Now, there's two ways in which we could approach this. There's the simple way, which is kind of restrictive, or there's the more slightly complicated way, but gives you basically total freedom. So I'm going to demonstrate the simple way very, very quickly, and then we'll take a look at some of the limitations, but then we're going to move on to doing it the best way. To do this, we're going to select our container, come over to the Elements section, and we're going to search for Posts. Choose the Posts element, and that now creates a post grid for us, or a post loop. So you can see we've got a basic starting point. Pretty cool. Now, if we come into the layout, for example, you can change the layout. This is currently using grid, but we can switch this over to list. We can switch it over to masonry, metro. Kind of get the idea. Let's set this back to grid. You can adjust the number of columns. We may say they want this into 3. You can choose the spacing in between. It's all quite cool. You come into your image and you can adjust things like in the image ratio, aspect ratio, and so on. Come into your fields and you can add additional fields in. So at the moment, we've only got the image, title, and the excerpt. Add another field in. We can get rid of what's written inside there. And then we can use our dynamic data lightning bolt. Now, I'll come on to this in a lot more detail as we go through. But this allows us to access that dynamic data. So let's click that, and from there, let's just choose something like the post date, change this over to something like p tag, and you can see now we have some dynamic data. We can rearrange this if we want to and adjust where it's positioned, and you kind of get the idea. This is quite useful, but we're still semi-limited. We can't choose whether we want to show or hide things based upon various different conditions, like someone's logged in or logged out. You know, it's okay. It's an okay starting point. I don't want to use this though. So let's delete that and let's build this now from scratch to give us maximum control. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a block. And this block is what we're going to use to be the individual card design. So if we jump back into our example, what I'm talking about here is this is a card design. So we've got the featured image, title, author, date, and so on. So each one of these is part of the loop, and each one of these is basically just a template being repeated over and over again with different data inside it, and that's what we're going to create. So with our block selected, let's put the first item in, which is going to be our featured image, and then I'm going to show you how we can start to create our loop to have this to loop through all our posts. So with our block selected, let's come over to our elements, and you'll see we've got these archive elements, which are specific because we're working with an archive template. We're going to ignore those for now. We're going to scroll down. We're going to add in a plain old vanilla image. We'll select that, and there's all the options you're used to seeing. Now, we can't select an image because if we do that, that's just going to simply open up our standard media browser, which isn't what we want. We want to be able to reference that dynamic data. So you'll notice next to the next area, we've got our little dynamic data icon. We select that. You can see this is what we saw in the previous example, but we have more control. If we scroll through, you can see there's an awful lot of dynamic data that we can reference. And this is just standard WordPress data. There's nothing else inside here. Don't be overwhelmed by this. It's all broken down into logical different sections. For this example, we're working with the post, so we'll just stick inside the post section and we'll choose the featured image. Now you'll notice that it tells us the dynamic data is empty. You may be wondering, why exactly is that? We've kind of set everything up. Well, the reason is because it doesn't know how to pull the dynamic data in yet. We haven't told it this is going to be a loop. Now, a loop just basically means, as you'd expect, it loops through all of our posts. There's our first post, our second post, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. So this just loops through, showing the same data pulled in from each individual post. So the featured image, the title, and so on. So to rectify that, we need to create a loop. And it's always easier when you have at least some dynamic data inside you. So this is why we've put the featured image in, because you can visually see the loop being built out. It's just a little bit easier. Coming back up to our block, because we want this to be the item that's going to loop, we'll select this, and we're going to come over to the left-hand side under content and choose use query loop. Open this up, and now we can use the query loop. Now, if you want a more detailed tutorial on this, you can check out this video where I go through in more detail how to use the query loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our first query. We'll select the query icon, and now we can choose what query type and so on. Now, again, don't be overwhelmed by this. You only need to fill out the information you need to display the content. You don't need to fill all of this out. So first of all, choose the post type. It's posts, just the standard WordPress posts. Post type, again, choose posts from there. We're going to order them by published date. We'll set them to be ascending. And we're going to say we want 8 posts per page. Cool. So now we've created our basic loop. Now let's say we don't want this to be the published date in ascending order. We want descending. Let's just change it. Set it to be descending. And boom, there you go. We've now flipped things around. So we're going to leave the query loop there. This is all we need to do. So once we've done that, we can now come over. We'll save this to make sure everything is in place. And you'll notice that we now have all the images being displayed down the page. It looks terrible, but the basic information is there. So before we put anything else in, let's just set up our basic layout. Then we can make sure that everything looks the way we want and is positioned the way we want. So for this, we're going to come back to our container, and we're going to set this to be display grid. And I'm not going to get into too much detail with this. We're going to keep this super simple. We're going to do 1FR, 1FR. We now get 2 columns. Pretty cool. All done. I'm going to come into our gaps, and I'm going to use my core framework to adjust the gap inside here. Let's set this to medium, and we now have our basic grid set up. Obviously, it still looks terrible because the images are all different sizes. So, easy to fix. Come into our image, and from there, what we're going to do is we're going to set the aspect ratio. So we're going to set this to be 4:3. Now, all our images look the same, although they look a little bit squished in some places. Easy to fix. Change the object fit, and we're just going to say cover. Boom, we've now set things up the way that we want. So there's the first part. We've created our first lot of dynamic data. Just for good practice, making sure the image is selected, we're going to change the HTML tag and set this to be a figure. And while we're at it, we're also going to come back up to the container. We're going to set this to use the HTML tag of UL for unordered list. And we're also then going to come into our styles, and we're going to get rid of the little extra space we've got on the left-hand side. So we're going to come into our layout, and what we're going to do is we're going to link all these together and set them to be 0. Boom, there we go, job done. Now come back to our block, come into our content and we're going to set the HTML tag on this to be li for list item. So semantically, this just makes a lot more sense now. Don't worry too much if you don't know about that. I would just say, just copy what I've done there. It's that simple. Okay, so we've got our basics. Let's just save this and take a preview. And as you can see, we've got a loop with our featured image and everything is looking pretty cool. Okay, next thing we want to do is start adding some more data in. So we'll make sure we've got our image selected and we're inside our block, which is part of our card design, which is inside our loop. So now when we add any new elements in, they're going to be looped through. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to pop in the post title. So we'll just choose the archive option, choose post title. Boom, there's our post title. And each one of these now has the post title added. Looks absolutely terrible, but that's fine. We can just select it, set this to be H3 to be semantically correct, and we can come into our styling. Now, normally I would get into working with global classes and so on, but I want to keep this really simple and not bog things down too much. So I'm literally just going to style things on the ID level, but just bear in mind, this is not the best way to work. So let's just come in, we'll set our typography, set our font size, we'll set this to be large, there we go. And we've got the basics set up. So we're going to do the same thing again. We'll come back into our elements. We'll choose the excerpt option. That's added the excerpt in. Let's just change this to be something like 25 characters long. So there's our excerpt all sorted out. Now, these are all very simplistic examples because these elements, these kind of already created for us. So what we're going to do is going to come back in, and this time we're going to choose to insert some rich text. When we've got that, let's get rid of this completely. Now we want to build up some inline content. We want to use a couple of pieces of dynamic data. So let's say we want to say when this was posted and who it was posted by. This is pretty cool. This is where you really start to see some of the power that you have when it comes to working with dynamic data. So let's just say posted, colon, going to come out to a little dynamic data icon, click, and whoa, there's a lot of options inside there. So for this example, we're going to say post, and we're going to say post date. And you can see it puts in the little short code that says this is dynamic data and replace it with the relevant information pulled from our database and display that on our screen. Let's just say we also want to put in who was posted by. And this is where one of the cool things comes about it. We can put this inline information and we can build it out in however we want. So again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to click. This time we obviously want to make sure we have who it was posted by. So we'll come down to the author and we'll say the author name. So you can see, again, it does exactly the same thing. And now if we want to, we can style this. So we can just set this to be bold. And you can see that updates in real time on our page, showing us the date that these were posted and who posted them. Really cool, really simple, and really easy way to work. So again, let's just quickly save this. And you can see we're now started to build things out. We've created our loop, we've inserted dynamic data, we've used built-in elements with dynamic data, and we've created inline dynamic data using the rich text and any of those little shortcodes. So this is just what you'd end up doing. You'd kind of repeat this same process for all the different elements you want to include in your designs. So building loops in a custom way is very, very simple. But we can, again, go way, way further. First of all, though, before we do, let's just quickly tidy things up. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new block in. We'll position that below the image because I want the image to kind of be full width. And then we're going to put the post title and the other elements inside there. And for good housekeeping, we're going to just call this content block. I'm going to rename the main block and we're going to call this post loop block. So we're going to select our content block, and what we're going to do is we're just going to give ourselves a bit of space. So now we've got some basic style and some organization in place. The next thing I want to do is have the ability to link this through to the actual post it's going to display. So how do we do it? Again, we're going to reference that dynamic data. So for this example, let's just keep this really simple and logical. We're going to choose the image. Again, this is not the best way of doing it, but for ease, I want to show you before we get into really deep in the weeds of setting up cards to be totally clickable and so on. It's beyond what I want to cover. So we're just going to focus on the image in this example. So we come to the left-hand section. We're going to come down to the link to, open this up, and you can see we've got some options. So we want this to go to the URL. So we're going to say other URL. Then it says select the link type. So we're going to say that this has to be dynamic data because we want to pull this dynamic data from our post listing. Click the post dynamic data, click our little dynamic data icon, and what we're going to do is we're going to say post URL. Simple as that. But again, we're using dynamic data. So now each one of these will loop through the image and the link will be looped through to the post as well. Again, hope that makes sense. So now we've created a much more usable card design. We've got everything we need in place. Now we could very easily leave it at this point, and you've seen how to get started with dynamic data in Bricks. But there's so much more we can do. So let's take a look at some more examples of how we can leverage dynamic data. Let's add a filter to filter through these to show only the ones we want to see for the various different sections or categories. To do that, we're going to come to our section and we're going to add in another container. And this container, let's position it where we need it. This container is going to contain our filter. So let's just rename this. Now at the point in time, the filters are an experimental feature inside Bricks. So you are going to need to enable these if you want to follow along. To do that, all you need to do is come into Bricks and into Settings. Under General, scroll down, and you'll see we've got Query Filters Experimental. Check this, hit Save Settings, and you'll have these additional elements. If you don't see them, this is probably the reason why you won't. Okay, so go back into our filter container, come back over to our elements, and just do a search for filter. And you can see this at this point in time has 7 different filter options. We're going to use the filter radio for this example. And you see that drops it in, we'll select it, we'll choose the target query. So again, this is using dynamic data. The query in this example is the query loop of our posts. So we just need to tell it what filter applies to what post loop. So we just connected the 2 dots. And this is why naming things just makes life so easy. So choose the select option, and there's our post loop block. And if you take a look on the structure panel on the right hand side, we've got post loop block, which is our post loop. We'll choose that option, and now we can configure this. So what we can do is we can say this is going to be on input. We don't want to have them to have to click on a submit button. The action is going to be to filter. The source is going to be the taxonomies. And then the taxonomy is going to be the category for our posts. So if we scroll up, you can see that now shows us all of the different categories for our posts. Now what we can do is we can choose to hide the empty ones. You can hide the count if you want to. You can set them up with a hierarchical. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the mode from radio and set this to be button because it just looks a little bit better. Just unhide the empty for now because for some reason it's not showing all the different categories, but they are there. So now we can configure the button and the button active. For this example, let's keep it super simple. We're going to add a border. We'll just do 2 pixels at the bottom. Style is going to be solid. We'll set this to be like a gray color or a pale color. There we go. And you can, if you want to, adjust the typography. You do the same for the active button. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to change the border color. And we'll set this to be the sort of peachy color or pinky color. And we can also come in, choose our pseudo classes and set this to be hover. Come to our button and we're going to adjust the border again on there. And we'll set this to be the darker green. Okay. Come back at the pseudo class. Let's just save this and test it out in the front end. And you see there's all of our different filters. So let's say, for example, we want to take a look at AI. There we go. There's our AI. Client updates, for example. All categories. Kind of get the idea. It's pretty cool and pretty simple. So now let's just come back and say hide empty. We'll just come into our style and set our position. And there we go. So that's added in the basics for our filtering. Again, pretty cool. Now, final thing I want to cover is let's just say you only want to show or hide certain things based upon the user role in this example. This is where conditional logic alongside dynamic data comes in really handy. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down into our card design and we're going to drop in a new rich text. And what we're going to do here is we're going to just post in something. It doesn't really matter what it is. We're going to keep it super simple. We'll come into our content. We'll remove this from here and we'll just say posted in. Choose our lightning bolt one more time. And from there, this time we're going to choose the terms. And we're going to come down and say categories, post term category. So we can list out what category or categories any of these are posted in. So you can see that pulled in our dynamic data. Let's just highlight this, just make it bold. Okay, so there's the information. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some conditional logic to this. So making sure we've got our element selected, our rich text, we're going to come up to the option for conditions. We're going to add a new condition in. And you'll notice that when we add a condition, if we take a look at the right-hand side on our structure panel, it shows us the little conditions icon so we can see at a glance any conditions. To set our condition, again, we've got our dynamic data we can reference. So again, we've got all the same things inside here for post and so on. But what we want is user login. So choose this option. Then you can choose how you want to check against it. So it's is or is not. So we're going to say is logged in. So only logged in users will see that. So what we need to do now is put something in there that if you're logged out, you have a message to tell you to log in or register to see it. So to do that, we're simply going to add in another rich text field, change the content in here, and we'll just put in the message we want to display. And all we're going to do now is set the conditions, add a new condition, set this for user login is logged out. Simple as that. So we'll click save. Let's preview this. And because we're logged in, you can see we see the post industry, media, and so on, whichever category it's actually posted in. Now let's open up an incognito window, paste the link in. And as you can see, you need to be registered and logged in to see this information. So we've set up conditional logic on dynamic data, checking against a cookie in this example. This is just scratching the surface of what you can achieve by using dynamic data inside Bricks Builder from WordPress. Now, if you want to go even deeper and find out how to work with tools like ACF, check out this video next. It's a great reference. And also check out learnbricksbuilder.com for all of my Bricks tutorials.